Well, good afternoon, everybody. Great to be back on the Kenai. We were just at the American Legion Post 20. They're celebrating the statewide convention right now, so that's great. It's great to have all our veterans here on the Kenai. But let me just begin by thanking Cassidy, Rusty, Liz, so many of you who make this part of our state so strong in terms of our economy. I'm sure you guys know the word, but I think we're looking at some numbers recently in terms of population gains in the state. This part of our state is actually gaining population, so that's great news. And look, I will just be, you know, totally honest. I love being on the Kenai. I love coming out here. I love the people. I love the spirit. I got a great team. You know, Elena Spraker, that wallflower who's very shy. Nobody, she's handing out some things. But Elena does a great job here. But it's the spirit of what's represented here in so many ways: private enterprise, entrepreneurship. We have a little bit of a old history that we came across a written report when the state of Alaska was coming out of our really difficult 1980s recession. And the state economist Neil Fried wrote in 1990 about the Kenai Peninsula. He said, this is the one place in the state where it has underlying economic strengths that keep the Kenai Peninsula strong. Diversification, value added, production, and exports, and no other area in the state enjoys such an assortment of basic industry, entrepreneurship, which drive the economy. So that was 1990s state economists talking about the Kenai, and I think that that holds true even now, maybe even more so. So what I wanted to do, we were kind of a late addition to the agenda. I was actually not supposed to be here this week, and a lot of things are going on in DC that kind of kept us there. And so I got in last night and said, hey, can we just crash the Kenai Peninsula Economic Development discussion? So thank you for letting us do that. And then I also think it's just the embrace of small business and entrepreneurship that's so very strong here. So what I want to do very quickly is just give a little bit of a kind of an update. And what I've been referring to is kind of best of times as it relates to certain things and worst of times as it relates to certain things. So I'll start with the bad news first. Some of you may have seen this. This grows all the time. This is what Elena handed out. This is what we referred to in my office as the Last Frontier Lockup. The Last Frontier Lockup. That's the page. It has a map of our great state. Literally every part of our state, every part of our economy, every industry has had some negative direct action by the federal government, by the Biden administration. If you flip this over, it's now up to 63 executive orders and executive actions from the Biden administration singularly focused on Alaska. 63. Now, look, we've kind of been doing a little research. We don't think there's ever been one state in the history of the country that has taken it on the chin so much from their own government. I'm going to talk here in a minute about Willow, what's happened there. But when Senator Murkowski and Congresswoman Peltola and I went to meet with the president on that final decision on the Willow project in the Oval Office, this number, that was about a year ago. This number was 46. Okay, and I handed this to the president, and I said, respectfully, Mr. President, we're in the Oval Office. I'm going to be respectful. I said, but this is just wrong, sir. Right? This is wrong. Like, no state should be getting the burden of, what a lot of environmental groups want to have happen, which is shut down Alaska. And you are doing it to us. And that's the context in which you need to review the Willow decision, because we were asking, remember, for a reapproval. That project had already been approved. But I just said, Mr. President, we need a ceasefire on the war on Alaska here coming out of the White House. And as you can see, we did get that Willow project reapproved, but the ceasefire never happened. So now we're at 63, and you may have seen just last weekend, the Biden administration had issued 2 more really, really big rules that actually came directly from the president. This was just last Friday. This was to shut down the rest of the National Petroleum Reserve of Alaska that was set aside by the federal government for oil and gas development. So no authority whatsoever to do that. And then a lot of these are issues on that 63 EO chart, executive order chart. A lot of these were things that we got done during the Trump administration, which were bipartisan, right? The vast majority of these are bipartisan. The NPRA, Willow, these are all things that the vast majority of Alaskans want to have happen. So the other one was the road that we got approved, an EIS, to the Ambler Mining District. So that was a 7-year EIS, $10 million, started in the Obama administration, approved during the Trump administration. And if you ever read ANILCA, there's a whole section in ANILCA that mandates the Secretary of Interior shall issue a right-of-way to the Ambler Mining District. Shall. That's in the law. So last Friday, President and Secretary of Interior Holland announced that they're shutting down the NPRA, which is illegal, and they're going to disapprove the road that was already approved to the Ambler Mining District and not allow any mining in the Ambler Mining District in interior Alaska, which probably has the biggest deposits of critical minerals, rare earths, and other things that we need of any place in the country. So that wasn't a good day. Last Friday was not a good day. There's something that Governor Dunleavy had mentioned a while ago, and I started using the line, but it's, look, this administration, we're in a very dangerous time right now in terms of international geopolitics. You have authoritarian regimes, China, Russia, Iran on the march. They're working together. This administration won't sanction the Iranian oil and gas sector, big source of their terrorism around the world, but it will sanction the Alaska oil and gas sector. Doesn't make a lot of sense at all, in my view. So, but I'm here more with some good news, because that's kind of the challenge part that we're dealing with. And I will tell you, part of my job, literally, a huge part of my job, every day to fight this. Every day we are working to fight this. But we have had some important successes. And, I get asked, Senator Murkowski, our congressman or Congresswoman Peltola, we get asked every year to go to Juneau and give our big kind of annual address on what's happening and what we're working on in the state of the federal government. And this year I focused a lot on, when I said best of times, worst of times, I focused a lot on the best of times, because there are some things that are starting to happen now that are really exciting. And one is we are certainly seeing a huge renaissance on the North Slope. And that, of course, impacts the whole state. But because of the great industry and innovation and entrepreneurship and private sector and small business work here on the Kenai Peninsula, that's really helping the Kenai. But the Willow project did get approved. Remember, this took about 20 years to permit, got reapproved by the Biden administration after the Trump administration had approved it. By the way, that was a great example of every Alaskan coming together. We had every single group, Alaska Native groups, businesses, labor unions, the whole state, the entire state legislature, every one of them, all 60, came together wrote the president. That was something else I handed the president. When I was in the Oval Office, I always liked that. Here you go, Mr. President. Here you go. Here, you take that too. But a resolution from our legislature down in Juneau, every one of them saying how important this was. So we got that done. That, as you know, is about a close to $10 billion project by ConocoPhillips. Estimated peak production almost 200,000 barrels a day, and peak jobs in terms of building that about 2,500 jobs. This winter during the construction season, which is still going on the slope, we have about 1,800 workers on that Willow project right now. That is really good. That's great for the state. It's great for the Kenai. By the way, that's great for America, right? One of our great strengths as a country is our natural resources and other things, which is why I refer to the Biden administration's last Friday lockup of the NPRA and Ambler as a national security suicide. Like, what are we doing? The Chinese are dominating critical minerals around the world, and we just shut down the biggest critical mineral deposit in America. We're just going to be more reliant on the Chinese Communist Party for our economy. It makes no sense, especially when we have the highest standards in the world on energy and natural resource production. But so you have that project, you have the Pitka project that's happening, another really, really big project that's on state land on the North Slope. That's another, 80,000 barrels a day. A bunch of folks are working on that right now. And the exploration season on the North Slope, on state land, in the NPRA was also a real successful one. So I was at a big energy conference down in Houston, some of you may have heard of, called CERAWeek. It's probably the biggest energy conference in the world. And they talked about the 3 hottest oil and gas plays in the world. Number 3 was the North Slope of Alaska. So there's a lot going on, and it's exciting. And this part of our economy on the Kenai Peninsula plays a huge role in that. So that is really, really exciting. The other thing that's exciting is infrastructure. Now, I always like to say we are a resource-rich, infrastructure-poor state, which is why one of the things that I do back in D.C., whenever there is an opportunity for more infrastructure from the federal government, which, by the way, is a core responsibility of the federal government, building roads, ports, bridges, I'm all in. Resource-rich, infrastructure-poor. We have less road miles in Connecticut, and we're almost 120 times bigger than Connecticut. So don't even get me going about the states who are puny, who have way more roads than we do. It drives me crazy. So when we have an opportunity to do it, which we have had, I certainly jump on it. So we had this infrastructure bill, which again wasn't perfect, but now we're starting to see a lot of infrastructure, federal dollars coming our way that we need. Roads, bridges, ports. Here on the Kenai, we got the Bluff Erosion Project happening, the Lowell Creek diversion down in Seward, which we've only been talking about for 40 years. Finally doing that. We have big infrastructure projects. We're finally building this strategic Arctic port in Nome. There's a whole host of things. We're working with the leadership down in Homer on the harbor down there. So we're going to keep really, really focusing on the infrastructure that we need, which again, to me, is really exciting. We are continuing for Alaska our buildup of our military and Coast Guard. We have fast response cutters now coming to Seward that are going to be home ported there. We have icebreakers now that we're finally building. One's going to be home ported in Juneau. We have a big military buildup that is happening all throughout the state in terms of the Coast Guard. We are now home to what they call 5th generation fighters. These are stealth supersonic fighters, right? F-22s, F-35s. Alaska is now home to over 100 5th generation fighters. Okay, there's no place on the planet that has that kind of 5th gen fighter power. So we have now become a really, really strategic place in anyone's viewpoint in terms of America's national security because of where we are. And so we are building that up very dramatically. I have kind of an informal agreement with the head of the Corps of Engineers who lets all these infrastructure, military build-up projects, the goal that I've put forward them, they've agreed to it, 90% of those federal dollars go to Alaskans. Businesses, workers, contractors, and that's not some kind of like, hey, how come you're getting all that? Because we're the best at doing it. You know, we had this Clear Air Force Base long-range discrimination radar site that they just built out, almost $1 billion project, the Clear Air Station. Finished that up on time, on budget. And as I said to the head of the Corps of Engineers, that was done by Alaskans. Think about if you had like a contractor from Georgia, right? 40 below zero, it's dark in February, you're trying to build out a Clear Air Force Base. Those guys wouldn't even know how to get out of their sleeping bag, right? Let alone build it on time, but our workers know how to do that. So all these federal dollars in terms of military buildup, Coast Guard buildup, infrastructure, broadband, that's something else I hadn't even talked about in that infrastructure bill. We had a huge debate in the Congress on broadband. What's the formula for which states get the broadband build-out money? And it was a battle. Republicans were more focused on rural states. My Democratic colleagues were more like, hey, I want to take the urban area, you know, name a city, and go from 4G to 5G. That's what we should prioritize. And I was like, 4G to 5G? I'm like, how about no G, right? Like, we don't have anything here. Shouldn't we start with the, I'm serious. How about no G? We don't have any G. How about, shouldn't we start with places that don't have any broadband and internet connectivity first? So we won that debate. The formula in the infrastructure bill dramatically favors us. And that is why we're seeing well over $1 billion in broadband build out just to Alaska. So we are getting more per capita more than any other state by far, but we're getting almost more than any other state by far, just not even per capita. And the reason is we're the state that's the least connected. And as you guys know, that is 21st century infrastructure, broadband and internet connectivity. So we have that going on. We're getting ready to pass what's called the Federal Aviation Reauthorization Act, which is going to be huge for our aviation sector, especially when it comes to aviation safety and aviation infrastructure. You know, again, we have more pilots per capita, but we have the highest crash rates. We have the highest mortality rates of aviation of any place in the country. So this FAA bill that's coming should be passing in the next month or so. I'm on the committee that wrote that. We were able to get a ton of aviation safety infrastructure for our state. That most states just assume, oh yeah, I have weather systems, I have infrastructure. A lot of our airports, we don't have that in our rural communities. So that's coming. We have a huge boost in tourism that's coming. We even have shipbuilding that's happening. You know, go down to Seward, see the guys at JAG bringing good contracts for maintenance on Coast Guard vessels. So when you look at this, all in private sector, public sector, federal, I didn't even mention cargo aviation, which is really taken off. We probably in the next 4 to 5 years have at least $25 billion of investment coming our way. Not like pie in the sky, like it's coming. And that's exciting. That's going to mean a lot of jobs. That's going to mean a lot of big jobs. In my view, the Kenai is going to play a really, really important role. Let me just end with just 2 areas that I think are concerns. I know are concerns, but what we're doing to work on this and hopefully turn around some of our challenges. The first is with regard to our fisheries. You know, again, it's kind of best of times, worst of times in certain areas. You see the sockeye salmon run in Bristol Bay continues to break records every year. But a lot of our fisheries, both commercial and sport, are hurting, are really hurting. And one of the things that I've been very, very focused on is this dramatic decline in the health and runs of some of our most iconic species, kings in particular, on our most iconic rivers, the Kenai, the Yukon, the Kuskokwim, we've seen these dramatic drop-offs in terms of the returns. And of course, this is devastating for economies in rural places. It's devastating for the culture and heritage of a lot of our Alaska Native communities who've been relying on the king salmon runs for generations. So last year, I had a bill called the Alaska Salmon Research Task Force Act that passed. And the whole idea on this bill is to bring the best minds, state, federal, university, indigenous, to come together and sit down and say, what is happening? What do we really think is happening? Why are we seeing these dramatic crashes in the runs of particularly king salmon, but other species? What is it? A lot of people have theories, a lot of good theories out there. When I initially put this bill together, as you guys know, sometimes fish politics can be a little challenging. I don't have to tell people here on the Kenai that. But I was just like, hey, trust me, I have no agenda here. None. I just want to know. You can't start to get back to sustainable, healthy fisheries unless you really know. So that is now happening. That law passed, and we have this task force of literally the best minds who have focused on this, and they're doing it. And already, I'll give you one example where we're finding a huge challenge that we got to fix. Federal research dollars on salmon there's a huge gap there. Huge gap. And that leads to part of the reason we don't know what the problem is. Why is that happening? Think about it. The state manages, for the most part, salmon harvests, but the salmon, for a lot of their lives, live out in the big ocean. The state doesn't do research out there, and because the feds don't manage that part of fisheries harvest, they don't do research out there. So nobody's actually doing research in the area where these salmon live most of their life. What's happening? So we're going to fix that. And so that is one area that we're working hard on. Stay tuned. I think every Alaskan wants, we all want, which is more sustainable, more healthy salmon fisheries. And that's what this bill is focused on. And then the second one, which we did have success on finally, it was an issue that drove me absolutely crazy, given how unfair it was one of the things that's been really hurting our commercial fishing industry all over the state is the Russian fishery, which is huge. They've been flooding the market with all kinds of different species, pollock, cod, certainly salmon. They don't fish and harvest nearly as sustainably as we do. And for the last 10 years, we have had this unbelievable unfair situation where starting in 2014, the Russians banned any American importation of fish into their country. So 10 years ago, starting 10 years ago, they put a ban on any American who is catching fish to export it to Russia. And yet the Russians have been able to import their fish into American markets almost duty-free for the last 10 years. You want to talk about an unlevel playing field. We can't export one fish to them. They can flood the market with their fish to us. That was devastating our fisheries and our market demand. They were taking market from our Alaska fishermen. And so I was able to, after the invasion of Ukraine, when the Biden administration was putting together a sanctions package, we worked really hard with them saying, hey, you need to sanction the Russian fleet. Don't let them import fish into our country if we can't export to them. So the Biden administration did, to their credit. I had legislation that's been trying to do that for the last 10 years, and it kept getting blocked by some of my Democratic Senate colleagues. Not sure why. Well, then you may have heard once the Russians were blocked from importing into the United States, they started sending all their fish to China, right? And then the Chinese were circumventing this, and they were exporting it into our markets from China. So you had communist dictatorship fish from Russia going to China, coming to our market. And I kept saying, look, we need to focus on freedom fish, not communist fish. Seriously, I mean it. So we worked again with this administration. And trust me, I think when cabinet officials, I worked really hard on when someone's up for their confirmation. I always meet with them. I always give them, hey, these are my big Alaska issues. You need to work with me on this. I'm going to vote for you for your confirmation. And oh, by the way, I'd like to get your personal cell phone. And at the time, that seems kind of an innocuous request. And sometimes I never call these guys. Sometimes they're like, God damn it, why did I give Senator Sullivan my cell phone? Because, so on this issue, I was relentless, right? And so right before Christmas, you may have seen that we did get that Chinese loophole shut. So right now, there is no way any Russian fish anywhere in the world can come into this market. That is going to help stabilize our prices on our fish a little bit. And I just met last week with the trade minister in charge of the European Union, so the entire European bloc. And we are working really hard to try to get the Europeans to ban Russian fish into Europe as well. If that happens, that's going to help our fishery, wherever you are in Alaska. That's going to help our fisheries a lot. And we're trying to get the Japanese to ban the importation of Russian fish into Japan as well. So stay tuned on that one. That's going to be a lot of work. It has been hurting our fisheries really, really badly. It's been a completely unfair trading playing field that we finally fixed. And then the final one I just want to mention, I know that the issue of housing throughout our entire state, regardless of where you are, Anchorage, Fairbanks, Kenai, Kodiak, rural communities in particular, has been a big challenge. It's really kind of a choke on economic growth in so many communities, and the ability for our military and Coast Guard to grow where those places in certain parts of our state where they are growing. So we've taken a whole bunch of initiatives to try to get affordable housing back to our state. This is going to be local, state, federal, but this is something the governor and I have been talking a lot about. I've been talking about a lot with our representatives down in Juneau, but that's another one that we think is really important. Some good things that are happening on that, but it's going to take some time. It's a big challenge in Alaska. It's actually a big challenge throughout the country. And so we know that that's something that's on a lot of people's minds. So anyways, with that, just wanted to check in. Like I said, some good things happening, some not so good things happening. We'll fight the bad ones. We'll promote the good ones. And again, in terms of the Kenai, great to be here. Thank you for all you're doing. A lot of elected officials I know are here, and our business leaders. You guys are working hard to keep our economy strong, employ people, and this part of the state, in my view, provides a great example of a diversified, strong, resilient economy that we can all learn from. And so trying to learn from all of you, and it's great to be back in the Kenai. So thanks very much.